another tough end to the season, Leafs Nation. What does the future look like for the Toronto Maple Leafs? Do they keep the core four around? Can the cap even allow for that? Do they keep Sheldon, Keefe, or Kyle Dubas around? We're going to talk about that and more in today's episode, so let's go ahead and get right into it. Leafs fans have gotten so used to this end, and it is always in heartbreak in the playoffs, and who knows if they will be able to change that moving forward, but a lot will need to be said and taken apart if they are to do that, in my mind. I know a lot of players have come out in interviews post playoffs so far and have said they want to run it back, but will they have the same coach or GM? To be quite honest, I'm not entirely sure. And if they want to make some changes, they're going to need some cap room to do it. We'll get into that in just a moment. That they're great during the regular season, have had their second best regular season ever in Leafs history, just to get into the playoffs and get absolutely outplayed. I thought they were outplayed by the Lightning and obviously outplayed by the Florida Panthers. They just don't have that style of play that suits teams when they get to the playoffs. But they're great in the regular season. They can put up all the points as a team and individuals that they want. But as of right now, it's not looking good for playoff pushes with the way their team is currently constructed. And again, that falls on the shoulders of Kyle Dubas, the GM. You can throw Kyle Shanahan in there as well, of putting this team together in the way that it's currently constructed. The majority of the team is tied up in the core four with their salary caps. It'll be hard to make any changes if they're wanting to go in a different direction or bring a couple more scrappy players in to change the feel. You need to change the culture somehow, but it is Toronto. That is tough to do. But we're going to go ahead and take a quick look at the contracts and everything, and moving forward we'll also take a look at stats, but let's get into that right now. On the screen right now we are utilizing Cap Friendly, and we'll talk a little bit more in depth about their regular season, moving into the playoffs, their play and everything like that, after also going through their contracts and whatnot, looking forward to next year. But man, looking at their contracts and everything on the screen right now, first off, the draft picks for next year, and this kind of plays into, does Dubas stay around? Looking at their draft picks, they don't even have their own first round pick. They have the Bruins, which is a little bit better, but they have one first rounder, a fifth, and a sixth. Who knows if they will trade to get some more. 2024, you have a first, then you have a third, fourth, fifth. Who knows if they will end up trading any of those away. And then in 2025, you're looking at a third round pick, 2 fifths, a sixth, and a seventh. You don't even have a first pick in the top 2 rounds of the draft. So for future building, it is not looking very good for the Toronto Maple Leafs unless they were to do absolutely dog next year to get a high pick for 2024, and I don't see that happening anytime soon. Looking at the contracts that they need to get done for this upcoming season, there's a couple key pieces of players that, man, is it even possible to bring the team back with the current construction of their team and salary cap allocation? I mean, you take a look, Alexander Kerfoot, do you even want to keep him around? Because when you take a look at his stats, and these are just regular season stats right now, Kerfoot, 32 points, 10 goals, 22 assists, plus 8 on the year. I mean, I thought he had a very solid year for his caliber of player, a depth forward. Maybe you look to keep him around. Potentially. I don't actually know his age off of this page, but on this page, he is only 28 years old. Is he going to command a 3.5 for maybe 3 years or 4.2? I think he'll land around the 3.2 to 4.2 million dollar range. Do they want to put their money into him when they have so many other unrestricted free agents that they need to sign if they want to sign them? Before we even start talking a little bit more about what players they should bring back and whatnot, just looking at the projected cap space for next year alone is only $7.4 million. That's not a lot to work with, considering you've got Kerfoot, Ryan O'Reilly, Kampf, who was amazing during the playoffs, Achari. We're looking at Bunting, another key piece for them for playing on that top line, that scrappy player. Simmons, Zach Aston Reese, don't think they'll be back anyways, but on the back end as well, you got Hull, you got Shen, and you've got Gustafsson. And between the pipes, Samsonov is going to be restricted. I know you've got some guys on long-term injured reserve who we'll talk about in a moment of will they come back or not, at least one of them. But man, looking with about roughly $7 million, we'll say 7.5 roughly $1 million of cap worth of room to work with, who are you going to put that in? Kerfoot, let's say he asks for $3 million. That's literally almost already half of your projected cap to then try and sign a couple more players. So let's say then you have $3.5 million, and let's say Camp and Achari, and I mean, you're not going to get Bunting for less than 1.5, I think, per year. I think he's going to have a little bit of a similar deal to Sam Lafferty, maybe a little bit higher, I think in the $2 million range. So let's say you sign Kerfoot and Bunting, let's say to 4 and then 2, you're looking at then roughly about 1.3 to 1.7-ish odd million dollars left to work with. And you've got some other players and you need to sign. The math just doesn't add up with the amount of players that need to be re-signed. I think key players you should look at re-signing off of the unrestricteds alone with the cap space they have. I think you got to try to keep Kerfoot around. He didn't look so great in the playoffs, though, and he has been around for a little while, just not really doing enough, I think, as a Leaf. So maybe you do look to move on from him potentially. Looking at some other depth players that the Leafs do have, do you look to try to bring back Ryan O'Reilly on a cheap deal? I think he'll probably command anywhere from around 2.8 to 3.6 per year if he wants to do maybe a 2-year deal. If he is looking to try to win a cup and stick around in Toronto, I think you maybe need to consider trying to bring him back. I thought he was very excellent in the playoffs. Obviously, he had a little tough go when he first came over, getting injured there at the end of the year and not coming back until playoffs. I think Camp, you need to try to re-sign him one way or another. I thought he was very solid for them in the playoffs, and taking a look at his stats this year, I mean, for depth forward, he was 9th on the team in points, 7 goals, 20 assists for 27 points. Was only a +6 on the year, only 8 penalty minutes. He did play 82 games, all for Toronto. I mean, for a depth player, you can't really complain too much with him putting up 20 points. I think he's usually good for 20 to 28. I think that's pretty good for a depth sixth, bottom 6, I should say, or below type forward. I think you need to find a way to bring him back. He brings that salt and pepper. He's got speed. He'll throw the body around, and he actually has some pretty decent hockey IQ. So I think a player like that you should probably think about bringing back. Achari, he does throw the body around, was leading the playoffs in hits before the Leafs got knocked out. Is he going to command that $1.2 to $1.8 million range? Maybe, maybe not. I don't know how that will shake up. I think that will have a big play in if they look to bring him back or not. Bunting, he's probably going to want 2.2 to 2.8, maybe even command a little bit higher, 3.2. If he could snipe 2.8 for about, I don't know, per year for 3 to 4 years, I think that's a solid deal for him, 27 years old, or maybe even do a bridge deal 2 years at like a 2.8 to 3.2 range, and then maybe try to cash in if he keeps playing with Matthews and Marner if they are still on the team. We'll get into that in just a moment. And then I think Simmons, Zach Aston Reese, I don't even think they will consider bringing them back. I thought Zach Aston Reese was a liability during the playoffs. Didn't really have the best of years either. He played 77 games, -6, 10 goals, 4 assists. For a depth fourth line forward, I didn't think he did anything that they really needed or wanted out of him. And in the playoffs, in the first series, again, complete liability. That's why you didn't see him at all. Maybe one game against the Panthers, but you didn't really see him too much either when he was even in the lineup. On the back end, Hull, I think you move on from him. I didn't think he looked very good at all in the playoffs. Is 31 years old. And when you compare him and Luke Schenn, again, Luke Schenn, 33 years old, 2 years older than Hull. He's probably only going to have a max deal of maybe $900 or $1,000 or $1 million. For possibly you could snipe him for 2 years. I think that is feasible. With his age, I'm not too worried about it. I thought he looked extremely good in the playoffs. His speed was there. His vision was there. His play was there. There are a couple games where the Leafs defense didn't look very good at all, out of position, puck watching, 2 men below the goal line, no one in front of the net. But I thought overall he was probably their second best defenseman throughout the entire playoffs behind Morgan Riley. So I think you bring Schenn back, you let Hull go unless they want to keep a big body around. I thought he was a complete liability out there during the playoffs and during the year. When we take a look at Hull, 80 games, 2 goals, 16 assists. Obviously, as a stat guy, you're not really looking at those points per se for a defensive type defenseman. You're looking at the plus minus. He was plus 15 on the year, which is great. But when you compare him, and he did come over in a trade, Luke Schenn was technically a -1, but he was with Vancouver for the majority of the year. Only played 15 games with the Leafs, but I think the playoffs really showed that he is a solid Leaf. He was originally drafted by them, so I think he will stay. And Gustafsson, he's 31 years old. They'll probably let him go and maybe have an elevated role for Timothy Liljegren. Who knows? And then between the pipes, it is definitely interesting. I think Woll looked very good. I think he's proven that he could be a goaltender for the future for the Toronto Maple Leafs. Do you bring Samsonov back? He's probably going to command anywhere from, I'd say, $2 million to $2.65 million per year. Maybe you bring him back on a 2-3-year bridge deal. Matt Murray's already on the books for $4,687,500 for the next season. So at that point, do you let Samsonov go, knowing that Joseph Woll is a wall? Between the pipes, he looked very good after coming into the playoffs. I think that is a highly realistic thing, so maybe you can save some money there. 1.8 in that fact, so that maybe that could go towards trying to re-sign Kerfoot or bring in somebody else. Now, the biggest question is for if it is, in fact, Dubas or a new general manager is, do you break up the core four? And if so, who of the core four do you break up? Well, looking at the contracts and looking at the way that they've played, let's look at team stats for last year. Regular season, obviously Marner, great year, nominee for the Selke Trophy. Don't know how that's really possible. I know he did play very well defensively, but in the playoffs, he also did lead the team in points, but there are certain times where Marner is just like, what are you doing, sir? Same with Nylander, same with Matthews, and same with Tavares. They all have their moments where it's like, what are you doing? But Marner, 99 points, 30 goals, 69 assists, plus 18 on the year. William Nylander, 40 goals, 47 assists, 87 points. Austin Matthews, 40 goals, 45 assists, 85 points for a year where he didn't even play all 82 games. He only played 74 games, so that's pretty darn good. Plus 31 on the year as well. John Tavares, -7, 36 goals, 44 assists for 80 points. And then it's a massive drop-off. Next person doesn't even have 50, and it's Bunting, and he did play with Marner and Matthews for the majority of the year, plus 21. I think his points are a little inflated. If he wasn't playing with those guys, he wouldn't be that high. I think he'd be around 35 to 40 points if he's not playing on that top line. And then it drops off. It is just a massive drop-off. So yes, they are performing. They are getting points. But with the current construction of their team, the salary cap, look, 14.1% for Matthews, 13.3%. This is percent total of the entire team cap. And the majority of you already know this, that it's tied up in essentially 5 players. The core 4, Matthews, Tavares, Marner, Nylander, and you could even call it the core 5 because Morgan Riley is on an absolute steal of a deal for his caliber of player at $7.5 million for the next forever, for what it seems, 2029 to 2030, which is insane. So he's a Leaf for life, unless when he gets old he sucks and they trade him. But that's a steal of a deal. Nylander. A lot of people usually say, oh, just get rid of Nylander and we'll keep the core 3 together. Marner, Tavares, and Matthews. I think that's honestly a mistake. Nylander, yes, he does have boneheaded plays and he plays a little loose. And I mean, you could say the same for all 3 of them. He is 27 years old. He's the oldest of the 3 young ones of the core 4. But I think he has been one of their most consistent playoff performers. I know people could say, and we'll take a look at playoff stats now as I pull that up. People could say, oh man, Willie wasn't great this year in the playoffs. And in my mind, you could say, well, yeah, I don't think he was that great. Took him a while to get going in the Florida Panthers series, and I think they could have used old Willie from playoff years past, which carried the Leafs to potentially winning series. He didn't really show up this year, even though he did have 10 points in 11 games played, -4 again, a little bit of liability this year, but Matthews, I thought, even though he has 11 points in 11 games, I thought he was fairly quiet. I thought he was shut down by the top lines. I think Tampa and the Panthers did a great job of finding ways to shut him down. And even with that, he still had 5 goals, 6 assists. Morgan Riley, very solid. Nothing really bad to say about him. Maybe a couple plays here and there throughout this entire season, and I'd say the playoffs. Plus 11, that's pretty darn good. And then Mitch Marner. You can say, oh yeah, he had 14 points, 3 goals, 11 assists in 11 games played, plus 7. But there was just something about his play that there's sometimes in some games it's like, 1, where is he? He's not really doing much. 2, you'd be like, oh wow, those are some great plays that were almost good, almost worked, almost doesn't cut it. You need to get her done. And you can say, as diehard Leafs fan, he had 14 points in 11 games. Okay, good for him. That's great. They are bounced. They're not moving on to the conference final. They didn't show up when they needed them to show up the most. Tavares, they're not going to get rid of Tavares. That's just not going to happen. He's the captain. He only had 8 points, minus 1. Looked kind of like a ghost. There were a couple games throughout the playoffs where he did show up and looked very good. And we'll get into Matthew Knies in just a moment. Really excited for his future with the Leafs. Cannot say enough about him. He looked great in the playoffs. Shame that he got hurt. And I was going to say, he's right there. He's on his entry-level deal. So that's a huge, huge deal for them, I think, in potentially who they could potentially get rid of. And that begs the question of, okay, with Knies coming in and to maybe open up some cap space and change things up, change the culture a little bit, in my mind, I go with either Nylander or I go with Marner. Because next year is a contract year for Austin Matthews, and I think he's going to play extremely well, and you're not going to get rid of Austin Matthews, potential future face of the NHL, was on the cover for NHL video games and whatnot. You're not getting rid of Tavares, even though he's $11 million cap. I don't know what team would take that on in their right mind. But Nylander's locked in for the next 2 seasons at 10-9. I think you could package that into some draft picks or potential depth players to bring him in and also free up some cap space for potential free agents this offseason. I think that would be the smartest thing to do for not only the Leafs, even though it would be a little bit of a loss. You've got Knies coming up. You can keep bunting with Matthews if you want. You can even move Willie up, giving him more responsibility in a role in a contract year along with Matthews, where then maybe you have to give him the bag, because we all know Matthews is probably going to be the first NHL player to hit $13 million a year. That's probably going to happen. The cap's going up, so it won't be that much of a big deal, but you're going to know if the Leafs can't give him 13, they with their cap, they need to make it happen. So I think they need to move on from Marner or Nylander to open things up for future purposes. Because let's say after next year, they then give Matthews the bag. Then you have to also consider, okay, how did Willie do this year? Do we got to give him a bag? I think the highest Willie can go, if let's say he has a career year next year, gets 90 some odd points, carries them to, let's say, the 3rd round, he's probably going to get 9 to 9.5. And just with the current contracts and how it's structured with Tavares and Marner after next season still going to be making what they're making now, you're going to eventually have to move on from them. I think you do it early now and change the culture. So Marner or Nylander are the 2 players I think you should move on from to open things up and change things a little bit for the Leafs culture. Because again, you've got Knies on the come up. You've got Bunting. Try to keep Ryan O'Reilly around so you have 3 solid centers. You got Matthews, Tavares, and Ryan O'Reilly. So that's pretty solid there. You can build some pieces around there. Put Willie up with Matthews. You can stick him with Bunting. That's your top line. You can throw Tavares with Young Croak and Kerfoot, or maybe you bring in somebody at like $3 to $4 million a year as a free agent. There are a lot of things you can do if you can move on from one of those big contracts, and it's not going to be Matthews and it's not going to be Tavares. It's going to be either Marner or Nylander, depending on who the GM is, whether it is going to be Dubas or if it's going to be somebody else. They have a tough decision to make, and I think it'll be the best for the Leafs. Now, again, long-term IR, you've got Robinson. Will he come back healthy? I think he'd be a solid second, third line player, so you've got that going for you. Maybe you stick him with Nyes on the same line, two young guns figuring it out with O'Reilly. I think that'd be a sick line. That would be so fun to watch. You got Jake Muzzin. Will he ever come back and be the same? That's something to consider, and something that will play a huge factor in how contracts will work, how the cap will work, because he's got a pretty hefty toll for the next 2 years, 5.625. That'll play a factor in, okay, who do they bring back? Hall's probably gone if Muzzin can come back healthy. Other than that, the Leafs, it's almost comical at this point of how torturous, and thank God I'm not a Leafs fan, but it's almost torturous for Leafs fans what they have to go through with this team on a yearly basis. But next year, expect big changes, expect coaching changes, expect changes up top and upper management, expect some changes in their lineup. I think if a new GM comes in to shake things up, and I don't know who that would be, but expect something big in my mind, something big will happen. But overall, again, Leafs, you got out of the first round, so the snowball has started to be pushed down the hill, so you've got the start. Still not there yet. The playoffs are a different animal, and the team, I think, finally getting out of the first round, they'll take the offseason, think it over, and who knows, a new look Leafs could help, I think, in the long run, if they get rid of one of the core four and move on. I think it'll help in the long run. I think the Leafs will be better for it, and I think they'll make a deeper run next year. Those are my thoughts. Let me know what you guys think down below in the comments. I know for Leafs Nation, if you guys are Leafs fans, let me know frustrations. Let me know about the year, playoffs, what you think. Who should they move on from? Contracts. I mean, there's a lot to talk about here, so I want to hear you guys down below in the comments. If you're new to the channel, be sure to hit that subscribe button. We'll be doing videos like this and putting out shorts and everything all over the summer and off season, as well as in the playoffs, and getting ready for the regular season next year. It's kind of crazy to think we're almost done with NHL this year. We still got some more hockey to go, so be excited for the rest of the playoffs, as the Stanley Cup is just right around the corner. But that's going to be it for this episode, guys. If you enjoyed it, be sure to drop a like on this video. But I hope you guys have a good one, and as always, stay dusty.